Section 4.4 extends our proof ability because we can use the fact that we already know how to prove triangles congruent. So when we prove triangles congruent, we can use one of our 5 different postulates. Side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, 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 side, and HL. What does it mean when we prove triangles congruent? Well, it does mean that all the triangle parts of the 2 triangles are congruent. And that is turned into a phrase in geometry, which is said corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. What does that mean? It just means that the parts are congruent if the triangles are. Instead of making you write that all out every single time you have to use it in a proof, we use the acronym CPCTC. But every time you use that in a proof for me, I'm going to make you tell me what the words are that go with it, because you're never going to remember the acronym if you aren't thinking about the words. And the order of the words is important. It's corresponding part of congruent triangles. So in your proof, if you don't already have congruent triangles, you can't use this. So let's talk about what it really means. So if I'm given in this picture that angle R is congruent to angle Q, and angle QPS is congruent to angle RSP. So we've got R and Q marked with the 1 arc, then QPS is here, RSP is here. So it's those with the 2 marks. I want to know why triangle PRS is congruent to triangle SQP. So take a moment right now and you're going to answer that question. Hopefully you marked PS as congruent because that's my shared side between the 2 of them. And at that point we have angle, angle, side as our reasoning. Okay, so our triangles are congruent. Well, if our triangles are congruent, that means every single part of those triangles is congruent. So we already have 3 parts listed. You've got RQ, R and Q, angle QPS and angle RSP, and segment PS. So what else can we say is congruent by corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, or CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So what are our other parts? Well, I see an extra angle. I know angle 1 has to be congruent to angle 2. There's also the side that's not marked with a tick mark that goes between R and S. Now I got to list this next segment in the right order. What angle does R go with? R goes with Q. So my next side's got to be QP. And then finally, there's one more side that we haven't talked about yet. And that's the one on the right and the left. So we've got, let's go with RP. So R was the 1 marked, so I know that that's got to go with Q. S. So we've got RS congruent to QP and RP congruent to QS. So those 3 parts are the extra parts that we can say are congruent after we already know the triangles are congruent. So now what we're going to do is use that in proofs. So as usual, you're going to mark what you know to be true on your picture. So segment AC is congruent to segment EC, and segment BC is congruent to segment DC. We're trying to prove angle A and angle E are congruent. Now remember, when you do proofs, that you can't do anything with that proof. It doesn't get written until the very last statement. But you do know that your given goes in the first spot. So segment AC congruent to segment EC, and segment BC congruent to DC. Why are they congruent? And hopefully you said given. Now, what I want to do with that is mark it on my picture. So AC is congruent to EC, and BC is congruent to DC. Y, again, we said given. Now, I'm going to mark angle 1 congruent to angle 2. And the reason I'm going to go mark that is, 1, it says it in the statement, but 2, marking it helps me realize where those angles are. Those angles are vertical angles. And you know vertical angles are congruent. So I've marked my picture specifically with each step as I hit it. I don't go down the whole statement side and start marking things down. I do it each step at a time. Why did I do that? Because now you should be able to look at that picture and tell me why triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EDC. Side angle side. Okay. Again, when you're doing those, remember to stay on one triangle. So side, here's my angle in between, here's my other side. And now finally, my last step says angle A is congruent to angle E. It's not even something I need to mark on the picture. I just need to think about why. Why would these two angles be congruent? Well, hopefully you're thinking because the triangles are congruent. And the minute I think that, I'm saying corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. All right, that next proof, we've got the triangle XYZ is isosceles, and segment XB bisects angle X. So I'm seeing two words there. Remember, whenever you're given a given and there's words in it, you want to think about what does it mean. So an isosceles triangle is going to tell me at least two sides congruent. So somewhere in here, I'm going to guess I see something about the sides of triangle XYZ being equal. And bisects means to cut in half. Now I'm cutting an angle in half. So when you cut an angle in half, you should get back two little angles. And I always like to think about that, because otherwise sometimes people see the word bisect and they just assume that they are writing down segments. But you're not getting segments back when you cut an angle in half, you're getting angles. So somewhere there's probably going to be some congruent angles in my proof that happen because of XB bisecting angle X. In the end, I'm trying to prove that Y is congruent to Z, so I know I'm not going to put that any earlier. So first step, XYZ is isosceles and segment XB bisects angle X. So we just write out that given. And we know the reason is given. Now there's really nothing I can mark on my picture from that. It didn't tell me anything was congruent, so I'm not worried about my picture yet. But now it's telling me that segment XY is congruent to XZ. So if I go to my picture, XY congruent to XZ, why would those two segments be congruent? I have to look back at what I was given, and I look at XYZ's isosceles or XB, segment XB bisects angle X. Well, the XB bisecting was supposed to give us little angles, so it can't be the angles one. Oh, isosceles. Isosceles tells me two sides are congruent. X, Y, Z has those two sides in it. So, why are those two sides congruent? Because it's isosceles. And when you say because it's isosceles, that's usually a definition. Because it's this word, you're thinking a definition whenever you say because it's this. All right, so then we're on step 3 where it's angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Well, that's kind of random, huh? Just two random angles. Why would they have to be congruent? Well, I've already used the first part of my given. I used XYZ as isosceles. So let's think about the second part. Segment XB bisects angle X. Again, we said that bisecting was going to give us two angles. Well, here's two angles. Are they the right angles? Segment XB, here's segment XB, bisects angle X. Those are the two angles. So we know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because of the definition of bisects. All right, then we've got segment XB congruent to segment XB. This takes us back to those initial properties that we learned at the beginning of this chapter, and that one's a reflexive. Now, if you don't like to think of the word reflexive, that's okay. What is that? It's the same line in both triangles. So I'll take same line, same segment. However you want to say, show me that it's the same thing in both triangles. It's just, it's in two different triangles, so we're saying it twice. All right, so why are these triangles congruent? First of all, I want you to write me a congruent statement and then give me the reason. All right, congruent statement. You know that XB was congruent to XB, so I know that XBY has to go with XB because X went with X, B went with B. Y's got to go with Z. Why? Side angle side. Now you're like, why is there another step? Well, there's another step because remember we were trying to prove that Y was congruent to Z. That's my last step. And why are those congruent? They are congruent because the two different triangles are congruent, and those are corresponding parts in those congruent triangles. So when you're thinking corresponding parts of congruent triangles, we know that they are congruent. All right, last one. Legend has it that Napoleon asked an officer to find the width of a river. The officer, standing at point O, mentally marked off a point P on the opposite shore. He then pulled his cap down until his line of sight past his visor V was directly at point P. Without changing the angle of his visor, he turned and noted the corresponding point Q on his side of the river. The officer paced off the distance OQ along the shore, and he estimated the distance to be 75 yards. We want to estimate the width of the river. So we are looking for, in this triangle, the width of the river. That's from O to P. All right, so we have a proof set up here for us. And the first thing the proof said is angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Why would these two angles be congruent? Well, the officer is standing at point O, and his visor is at point V. So this is the officer. VO is the officer himself. The next sentence says, without changing the angle of his visor. So he was looking over here at P, and he didn't change his visor angle, and he came and he looked over at Q. So this is given information. Because he didn't change his visor angle. All right, you should be able to answer me why VO is congruent to VO. Hopefully you either said reflexive or same line. Again, I take whichever answer you want to give. That says angle VOQ is congruent to VOP. When I look at that, VOQ and VOP are the right angles. How do we know they're right angles? Well, if VO is the officer, we have to hope that he's standing upright. And if you aren't standing at a 90-degree angle, you don't stay upright. So, since they're right angles and all right angles are congruent, we can say they're congruent. All right, you should be able to give me a triangle congruence postulate. Why are those two triangles congruent? VOQ to VOP. Angle, side, angle. Here's your angle. There's one pair. Here's your side. Here's your other angle. And last but not least, then why would OQ be congruent to OP? So why are these two congruent? Well, they're congruent because the triangles are congruent. So OQ here and OP there. So corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So that tells me that the river is how wide? 75 yards, because that's how long OQ is. And how wide is the river? If the officer stepped 20 paces and each pace was 2.5 feet. So ignoring the 75, just knowing, hey, that this distance that he walked was 20 paces. And each one was 2.5 feet wide. Give me an answer. You got to take the 20 paces times 2.5 feet for each one, and you get 50 feet.